Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erica George. I'm the Ernest Haddad Faculty Scholar and Associate Dean for Equity, Justice, and Engagement here at Boston University School of Law. And it is on behalf of Boston University's law community that I'm delighted to welcome you this afternoon to this latest in our series of Barbara Jordan speakers on race, law, and inequality. We're joined by Adrianna Quintero today, and the topic of her talk, Seeking Justice in an Imperfect System, could not be more timely or topical this election season. Before I introduce our speaker formally, I'd like to provide you with a bit of background on this series. Our dean, Angela Watching-Willig, brought Barbara Jordan Lecture Series to the Boston University law community to foster a deeper sense of engagement with issues of race, racism, and the law. As our courageous leader and a prolific scholar, she's often inviting us to consider the ways that both the law's role in perpetuating racism and opportunities that we could use law to mitigate racism could be something that we focus on in our research, scholarship, teaching, and outreach to others. So the Barbara Jordan Lecture Series is in honor of a distinguished alumna, a person dedicated to advancing justice from the BU class of 1959. The first African-American woman elected to Congress from the Deep South, Barbara Jordan. The series is now endowed into perpetuity thanks to a generous gift from Gary Tischler, a graduate of our class of 1987. We are deeply grateful for him and for his generous support of the law school and our students and for stepping up to fund this series so that future generations of BU law school students and alumni may also hear from leading scholars and legal thinkers and alumni on issues of race, law, and inequality. Now, after the lecture, we'll reserve time for audience questions. At that time, I'm going to ask that you state your BU law affiliation, if any, your name, and in the interest of time, I may group questions together to allow our speaker to respond more fully to your questions. And now for our speaker. Adrianna Quintero is a strategic leader and advocate for equitable climate solutions with over 2 decades of experience shaping policy and driving high-impact solutions at the intersections of clean energy, environmental justice, and equity. As vice president at the Energy Foundation, she led strategic development of programs to ensure a clean, sustainable energy future and to combat the climate crisis we're confronting. She also was the organization's first senior director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and she designs EF's efforts to ensure that the organization's culture, policies, and programmatic work embody and reflect a commitment to these values. She began her career as an attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council, where she pioneered work to increase awareness and advocacy about the disproportionate impacts of pollution on Black, Latinx, and communities of color. She also served on the Biden-Harris transition team for the U.S. Department of Energy, where she evaluated the agency's policies and practices to further advance our nation's approach to energy and environmental policy from her perspective of justice. I was telling her earlier that I was so excited that she was here to talk about these issues, often overlooked, particularly for Black and Brown communities. I'm from an environmental justice frontline community originally myself. So to know that someone's been out there doing this work before many came to appreciate the true crisis was illuminating and inspiring. But she now collaborates also with organizations and innovators in the tech and climate sectors to help solve complex policy and equity and sustainability challenges, often overlooked as the intersection of technology and maybe the way out of some of this crisis, but also the effects that it can have that are adverse and maybe unintended. Finally, she's a passionate advocate for leveraging her experience to advise companies and organizations on navigating these intersectionality issues, innovating around equity, and creating more just, sustainable, and resilient communities, because we do not do this work alone. So together, please let's welcome Adrianna Quintero. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I don't need that. Y'all can hear me? Wonderful. Well, okay, that way we don't get any feedback. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Dean, Erica. Thank you so much, and Angela, for being here as well. Thank you all for coming today. It's a little surreal, I have to say, to be back at BU and you know, to think back to these days, graduation day. with my friend and fellow alum, Michael Ferrero, as we celebrated our graduation. I really wish we had cell phones back then that were handy and taking really great pictures, because we have like 5 pictures of that day. But it really was just such an honor to get this invitation and this opportunity, because I remember not too long ago, it feels like yesterday, even though it was so long ago, being in this building, walking into this building. I still feel some of that same anxiety and like excitement. Oh my gosh, did I study enough? What am I going to get asked? And am I going to wait for the elevator? All of those things that go through your heads, like it's like, whew, I'm back here thinking all of those today. And I started thinking, well, what is it that I, as a student, would want to hear about? What didn't I learn in this building? Because you learn so much, and you learn it from your colleagues, you learn it, of course, from your amazing professors, from the clinics, from all of the various offerings that BU has. And I think the one thing that I came to is the real life experience, and kind of like, where do I fit in this puzzle? And so with that gave me a good starting point, because I started to look back on me, and what really drives me. And the first memory I have and that's seeking justice. And so the first memory that I have seeking justice, it was actually when I was just maybe a little bit older than these kids. You see a lot of like stock photography and stuff. So, but the really just in 6th grade. And I still remember that feeling of walking into our science class and learning that the school had decided we were no longer having a science fair. And it was about the middle of the year, so it wasn't the beginning. And we were infuriated. So we had small little tables where we worked. And I remember talking to the 2 or 3 of the kids at the table, and I said, this is just completely unfair. We cannot stand for this justice. So we organized and we spread the word, and luckily it was a smallish school, maybe about 80 students. Well, by lunchtime, we were able to organize a walkout. And we sat, no signs in hand, but we sat and said, we're not going to go back to class until we get our science fair, because we've really been looking forward to this opportunity to learn differently and to show what we have learned. And we felt like it was just not, we needed to send this message. You all can imagine, these are a bunch of 11, 12th graders. And this wasn't back in the day when, it used to, like nowadays we hear of schools walking out and protests. This was not the way. And by the way, this was when I was living in Colombia, in South America, Bogota, Colombia. So especially not heard of there. Needless to say, the director of the school, because it's a multi-grade school, came out and said, whoever doesn't go back to class is going to be expelled. So I remember saying, that is false. They're not going to expel every single one of us, but we must stand united. It doesn't work that way. Kids freaked out, some cried, some left, anyway. And we, of course, got called into the principal's office and were told that this cannot happen again, but we got our science fair. And the best or worst thing that you can teach a younger person is to own their power. It's terrible if you don't want them to have power, but it's fantastic if you want them to feel like they can bring about change in the world. And that really sat with me. It stuck with me, and it has carried me through. So it's not just that, of course. I was inspired by the stories that my family told of those great leaders who had done the same at a much larger scale and with much bigger risks and issues at stake. And leaders like Barbara Jordan and, of course, Martin Luther King. And I, of course, selected these 2 only because they have such great ties to this wonderful university. There are, of course, many, but these are truly inspirational individuals. And these quotes are some that really have been very important to me over the years. Because I think oftentimes it's easy to forget that whether it's the walkout at a sixth grade science class or a much bigger civil rights issues at stake, that our voices matter, and that if we are to pretend that things that are treating people unequally will not impact us, well, we're just fooling ourselves. So again, seeking justice continues to drive me. Now, right now, as we all know, we find ourselves at a crucial point in history. We're at a crossroads, facing an election within, I think it was 9 days or something. Just talking about it gives me chills. But this election holds really significant change for us. And regardless of the side on which you land, it really does, there's no denying that what happens next week will impact our democracy, will impact our civil rights, and will especially impact communities that have already historically been forced to live on the margins and been disenfranchised. And I just have to ask myself and ask you all, how did we get here? I'm optimistic and somewhat naive on the ability of the law, but the truth is to bring about change. But it does seem like we've hastened the downfall of our systems just exponentially, and that we're going back much further than we were proceeding forward. I do, in some, everybody seems to be having a bit of a panic around this, and I certainly do. And some of where I find hope on this is a colleague of mine who really helped launch a lot of the work that we've done on environmental justice, reminds me often that this backlash means it's working. It means what we're doing is actually having an impact. And I try and hold on to that, but it sure doesn't feel like that sometimes. So I get back to how did we get here? And the answer that is still eluding us. So when I graduated from BU, I became a public defender. Again, thanks to the wonderful public interest law clinic and the experience that I was able to have here, there, and with my professors who were fantastic, moot court experiences that were just so exhilarating. I wanted to be in the trenches. I wanted to step right into trying cases day in, day out. I knew that law firm litigation didn't really work that way, so I went to the public defender's office in Philadelphia. And they provided fantastic training and threw you in really quickly because our criminal defendants still really are in dire need of excellent representation. And again, that's where reality hit. You hit the courtroom, you're nervous, you walk in, and you have people's lives in your hands. And that was something that was just very vividly present day in and day out. And I really didn't know what to expect. But on one of my very first cases, I got the rude awakening. And that was a case where a young man, probably just recently turned 18, maybe he was 18 and 8 months or something, was charged with having a small amount of crack cocaine. And as a newer public defender, we had our supervisor in the room, and we're given cases that were unlikely to have any big repercussions. And so I came up, I had my defense, I had talked to my client, I was well prepared, I consulted with my supervising attorney, and we had a bench trial. It was, we presented the evidence, a little testimony. this boy had no record, so the expectation was, in the worst case, this would be probation or potentially just a diversion program. So when we were done, I was shocked and floored when the judge said guilty and took my client into custody. I was shaking in fear, looking at, what do I do here? And as I was talking to my supervisor, the clerk comes out and says, like, the judge would like to see you in chambers. And usually at that point it would be both me and the DA at the time, but no, court was done, court was adjourned. The judge had already left the bench. So I walked back, and yes, Your Honor, with my supervisor, you want to see me? He looked at me and said, and this was an older man, he'd definitely been on the bench for several decades, probably nearing retirement, said to me, I hope I taught you a lesson today, counselor. And I said, I hope you understand what happens when you insist on trying a case when I have a golf tee time that I've just missed. And as an attorney, you just have to say, yes, Your Honor, I understand. But, choking on my words, thinking, what is this outrage? But it's absolutely true. And so he said, file a motion and I will release your client this evening. So of course, I didn't even have time to process anything. I wrote the motion and he was released. But it was really my entree into what criminal justice can be. And sadly, it wasn't the only experience. I remember another client who I was actually waiting for this case to be tried, and a colleague of mine was arguing that the judge couldn't begin without her client being present. It's unconstitutional, and the judge literally from the bench says, I don't care what the Constitution says. And we all looked at each other like, this is on the record, like what? But, that it happens. And another time when I was called in late in the afternoon about a case. Well, it turns out the case was really an invitation to dinner that if I didn't accept was going to cost me in court the next day. So I thought, this is a lot, and it's really going to be tough to change these systems from the inside, even though we need to keep going. But anyway, it was a lot. And I said, at least I know this isn't happening at the district court levels or in federal courts, and that makes me feel a little better, right? This is just Philadelphia criminal courts, and these people are, it is what it is. And so when I look at what's happening now, I'm equally appalled, because while it's not so directly happening, and again, criminal defense has always been tough. There are always cases that you're appalled by. There are violations of rights that are, but somehow witnessing it firsthand is different. And I think the same thing goes for what we're seeing with the Supreme Court, right? We read just, literally tomes of Supreme Court cases, and we are always appalled and angry and debate them here in these rooms. But when we see it happening in the media, when we see the level of what's happening, I can't help but just be horrified at how politicized and just the lack of ethical standards that we're holding those who we, again, in law school are taught to consider the arbiters of justice. And this was my journey in thinking about this. So how do we seek justice in this type of system? How do we seek justice when we know that billionaires are funding boondoggle trips? How do we seek justice when we look at all of the cases that are coming before the court, and the level of I guess twister or Cirque du Soleil type acrobatics they're engaging in to find for a very clear political purpose. And that is very dangerous. And yes, I had plenty of wonderful articles to choose from our wonderful BU faculty. So this was a fantastic article. Thank you. I was hoping you'd be here. The title says it all. It truly is a constitutional embarrassment. And of course, these are just two of the biggies. But two of the big biggies, especially that immunity decision as we face this election. But of course, it doesn't stop there, right? We have just plenty of examples, and again, these are just the ones that are getting the headlines. So when another thing. So I do truly kind of go back to that level of naivete that I hold, that I still believe in the law. I think we all still in this room mostly believe in the power of the law and the power of the law to deliver just outcomes. And one of the highlights of my career after leaving the PD's office was having a case before the Supreme Court, being able to be on the brief in a case. Like, that's a real source of pride for one as a lawyer. And yet, in light of that, it truly makes you kind of wonder, what did it mean? And what does it mean for us going forward? And what's frightening is that we definitely didn't get here by accident. This is AI's interpretation of how we how we get here. This is the result of very deliberate, decades-long efforts by groups like Heritage Foundation and others to appoint judges and justices at all levels that are willing and in many cases happy to prioritize a very narrow agenda over the rights of many. And when that happens, it's a fundamental attack on our democratic principles and a risk to all of us. And one of the things that I think we learn as attorneys is to think about the future outcomes. And somehow it seems like they're not really thinking about the future outcomes, because the same way that this could work for you today, it could really work against you in the future. So again, no matter where you land, I go back to the quote by Martin Luther King Jr. of "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," because it truly does come back to haunt. So since leaving the PD's office, the public defender's office, I dedicated myself to environmental law, and environmental law and administrative law are inextricably intertwined. And I actually came to environmental law here at BU through my administrative law courses, because it was really interesting to me to, this was probably late second semester, second year. It was so interesting to me to see this whole body of law that gets created in a vacuum, frankly, and how we can use that to move things a little faster. And that, of course, is the spirit of it. Of course, there are many downsides as well, but in environmental law, we really rely on regulations significantly. And all of these are found in the Federal Register, and it's incredible to see the number of rules and regulations that get promulgated. But it's also a fantastic opportunity for us to bring about change. And I left the Defenders Association for the Natural Resources Defense Council, which of course, again, was like, wow, wait a minute. I read all of those cases in law school. And it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to work on everything from water quality and the regulations that could be really made stronger and better and protect our public health through those systems. Also, ditto for pesticides. I did significant work on pesticides. And it was the work on pesticides and clean water that really brought me to environmental justice. Because despite our Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, the regulations implementing a lot of these laws were still not doing a good job of taking into account the impacts on our most impacted communities. And that is truly also political, because the more that we can politically disenfranchise communities, the easier it is to get things done that will bolster the economy or help corporations. And we've had a lot of back and forth in our administrations, and that's the nature of our democracy. So we were working on a pesticides case, looking at the FQPA, the Food Quality Protection Act, and examining the residues of pesticides on foods, especially on the foods that children eat, and making an argument that first of all, noting that the Environmental Protection Agency had been sitting on the same data for about 40 years, so it was significantly outdated. We didn't know what the impacts were on any of us who eat food, which is all of us, or on those who apply pesticides, and that was under FIFRA, excuse me, Federal Insecticide. I had it yesterday, but I don't have it right now. Oh, thank you so much. You see, this is the benefit of having experts in the room. The downside as well, because I may get grilled on it, but no. Let's hope not. Yes, thank you. The Federal Insects and Rodenticide Act. I'm missing a letter there, but we did. We started looking at what needed to be updated and what we could do to better protect farm workers, better protect children. And they were two separate cases. And what we found was that even inside those agencies, there were a number of career staff who were happy to sit with us or see us, kind of maybe even secretly, to tell us about how important it is for us to bring these lawsuits so that they can actually implement the law the way that it is, so they can get their job done. These are career staffers, scientists, medical professionals who were saying, we're not looking at this data. They knew what the gaps that existed. And we were eager to bring that to light through our legal work, through our lawsuits. This was all fantastic, but what I kept noticing as an individual was, this is great. We're talking to the agencies, we're looking at the law, but where are the people? And why aren't we talking or looking at the people who are working in the fields and really their experience? Why aren't we looking at the children who don't have the ability to afford what is now Whole Foods, which was not that common, even in 2000. We didn't have as much organic food available. And so I, on my own, said to NRDC, we need to bring in the human element again. We need to really bring those stories to bear, because even in front of courts, when you start to talk about the real impacts on individuals, the stories can change. It's easy to look at the law as if it's something objective that's not going to impact anybody, and I think that gives judges and justices some level of distance that makes some of these decisions easier. Now, not all. Some are going to stand by their beliefs regardless, but it is really important not to forget who's behind the law and who are we doing this for. It's the child whose parent may not have time to make sure that those are washed, or whose father might walk in covered in pesticides because they've been working the fields all day, and hug their child, who then is also breathing those pesticides through the air, eating it on the food that's freshly picked, and all of those cumulative impacts are the things that we were asking the EPA to look at more carefully. So it just really highlights for us the importance of the whole picture, and the importance especially of looking at those who are most impacted. Because if I have a significant amount of privilege, I may not put all of those pieces together. And one of my goals as a result of that work was to really continue to push the environmental community as a whole to think about the people who are most impacted, to think about environmental justice and what that really looks like on the ground. And that's been one of the things that I've continued to work on to this day. And it continues to be a challenge, because environmental justice involves people, and people are complicated, and people have opinions, and people do little protests in 6th grade, and they complain, and they eat food, and that is not as easy as saying what I often hear now because my focus is mostly on climate. Yeah, but how do we measure that? We can actually measure greenhouse gas emissions, and there are answers. It's just that they get a little more complicated. They're answers the same way that it's not about a tea time or about, it's really about the whole picture. It's socioeconomic impacts, it's health impacts, it's all of these other areas of humanity that we are supposed to bring to that work. And so one of the things that I believe is essential to seeking justice is bringing our humanity to it, and challenging our lived experience by looking at the lived experiences of others and bringing those in, even when they may conflict with where we land. So we're going to turn to Chevron. One little backstory here before this, this lovely quote. Sitting again here, of course, you can't have an administrative law class without talking about Chevron versus the Natural Resources Defense Council. And it was really one of my first exposures to NRDC, and before getting there, one of the goals when I got to NRDC was I need to go and sit down with David Doniger, who litigated this and argued it before the Supreme Court. And yeah, he was, I mean, we're still connected today. He's a fantastic attorney, and we work with some wonderful lawyers there. But what, at the time, the environmental community was, so Chevron, let's just, because not everybody knows what Chevron is, although a lot of you in this room probably do. The Chevron decision gives the ability when Congress, when any law that is promulgated that directing an agency and has ambiguity to it, it's left to the agencies to decide. It's called Chevron deference. That was the decision in Chevron. And so it gives the power to the agencies, because the agencies are those best equipped to make the decisions. They have the scientists, they have the staff, they have the lawyers, they have the expertise, and so it's been the law for 40 years plus, and it's been one of those laws that, despite the fact that Chevron won, it was not that's a story for another day. They've been trying to overturn Chevron deference for a long time because it does usually turn out to be more protective for individuals and for communities than it does for business. And I thought this quote really captured the joy that was felt, I guess, by overturning Chevron, and just how blatantly the same folks who are placing, restructuring our justice system are also looking to take down the administrative state. And the fact that they are admitting as much is really repulsive. I have no other word. So again, this takes us right back to the election. We have someone who was chief of staff at EPA, probably feeling significantly burdened by all of these career staffers who were saying, yeah, we really can't promulgate that regulation. We really don't like that. And of course, also a co-author of Project 2025, which if you haven't read it, makes for perfect Halloween reading. Anyhow, the overturning Chevron is a really, really big deal and a really bad decision, because while it's going to benefit, it's probably a job creator for lawyers. It's going to, I love this quote by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson that really captures it. It could lead to just a full-on tsunami of litigation, because any corporation, anyone who doesn't like what EPA, FAA, DHS, like you name the agency, promulgated, can challenge it in court. So again, job creator for lawyers who want to take that on, that kind of work, but really terrible for democracy, because part of how rules and regulations are promulgated is through public comment, and that provides yet another democratic process by which individuals and communities can engage. Now, albeit it's tough in many cases for communities to really engage, because if I told you all that we have to go to, 3 hearings and you're going to sit there all day, it's tough to do, but it is possible. And there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that help to organize communities and help to make sure that their voices are heard. And in my opinion, anything that cuts off the democratic process is harmful, because it takes us again, further and further away from being able to ensure that our democracy is really capturing what we as a society value and hold dear. So where does this leave us, right? We're really close to this election. We are seeing this continue to shift. And we are, individuals speaking in a room where we all know the law, at least somewhat. We will all know the law when we leave this building. We will all have a great level of privilege by doing that. And that was where I kind of wanted to close, because, again, looking at Barbara Jordan, this quote to me says so much. This was when she got elected to the House. And even though she states that she'll only be one of 435, the other 434 will know that she's there. And that's the call to action. I think in our lives, in our careers, especially because we have the privilege of having learned here from great legal minds and exposed to so much, we have a duty to make sure that everyone around us knows that we're there, whether it's by asking them to vote, by teaching our children, by bringing a case that seeks justice. We have this responsibility. And we have the responsibility to put our legal minds to critically think about what this looks like in our lives, in our careers, to understand what it means to have 50-year-old precedent around women's rights just taken away, to give the power of deciding whether or not, how our airplanes should fly to a court. This is all in our hands. And regardless of where the election lands, we have to keep fighting. So I hope that you will all continue to, in your paths, to seek justice, and protect democracy.
Wow. Thank you so much, and also perfectly timed. And we have plenty of time for questions. Ignore the clock on the wall, it is wrong. But we've got about 30 minutes. So if there are questions for our speaker, I have the mic, so I'm just going to be rude and take the first question. One of the things that Adriana didn't mention and that I didn't is she was one of the founders of Voices Verdes. And I wanted to invite you to speak a bit more about that. She has a spectacular TED Talk that I recommend to all of you. But in that talk, you say, in nature, the strongest and most resilient systems are the most diverse, the most beautiful, and the most productive. We are connected to nature. We are an integral part of the system. We need to stand together in our diversity. And you brought an office similar to mine that our dean here has created on equity, diversity, engagement to the Energy Foundation. So I wanted to just invite you to speak to your motivations there, what drew you to founding an organization, even though you were deeply engaged in one of the best and most prolifically successful environmental movements, organization, litigation shops that there is. So.
Well, thank you for that question. And yeah, we could speak all day about, so it's what, after leaving NRDC, I was there for almost 19 years. It was a long time. It's a great place. Again, had a chance to work across. And as I alluded to in my talk, I founded Voces as an outgrowth of the fact that there were no farm workers in the pesticides cases. There were no, and the need to really bring back people and a recognition that people of color, especially in this country, continue to be disproportionately impacted by environmental harm. And what we need is to have a voice at the table and a presence so that our stories are reflected, so that our stories are considered. And again, that is part of what democracy is, right? It's really bringing in that representation, but meaningful representation. It's not just somebody who's just, placed. No, it's meaningful, who can tell the story and who can bring their experience as a data point, because our experiences are data points and they matter. So in founding Voces at NRDC, it was part of a longer journey that was, we need to, if we don't have this level of representation in the environmental movement, then we're not going to have representative and beneficial outcomes for all. And that was something that was, I was frankly surprised wasn't present and continues, again, to be a challenge. So it was great when we were able to bring along just groups of community leaders who could speak for their communities, of individuals who could tell about their experience and who could directly talk to legislators and ask for them to bring about change in their communities, to do differently. So when I left NRDC and went to Energy Foundation, I knew that Energy Foundation was not a very known for its diversity and focus on equity. It was very hyper-focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So there was a growing number of people who really wanted to take us there. And as a foundation, it's a little bit different. But it's even more important because what I had learned at NRDC was that foundations who hold the dollars hold a lot of the power of where you can take your work. And so it was especially important to make sure that at Energy Foundation, we understood that and held these values, that we need equitable representation, we need organization, we need to fund work that is encouraging that level of equitable engagement. And it all starts at home. So we started internally. We need to make sure everyone is educated. We made sure that we reflect the populations we aim to serve. And then we need to also know how to engage in a way that it's open and that really makes people want to talk to you, because you can't just walk in and say like, hey, I'm here, tell me what you need. You need to really say, be genuine in your care. And we were able to do that. And I think serendipitously, this was 2019 to 2020, and we were able to, in 2020, after George Floyd's murder, to really communicate beyond Energy Foundation to other environmental foundations and climate foundations the importance of this and see the outgrowth of that. Again, it continues to be a challenge because there's always that tendency to like, and especially now as we see more conservative opinions and more conservative legislatures, it becomes once again a challenge to say we cannot go backwards. We can only go forwards. We have to continue to move in the right direction.
Thank you for that. Other questions? And the reference to conservative legislatures, that is because they are indeed passing legislation banning diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you for that.
Great. Yes, my colleague Stephen Coe.
Adrianna, thanks so much for your comments and for being here. I just want to follow up a little bit more about the Voces Verdes, about your organization, about the question. One of the things that I've encountered in my own career and practice, and I spent some time thinking about, is how do you build solidarities across communities of color, while at the same time honoring that every community is distinct, it's its own world. So Voces Verdes, for example, you're focusing on the Latinx community, but obviously, in your remarks, you've really thought about communities more broadly and really what it is to be part of any of these communities in society. So how do you think about building those solidarities while at the same time being rooted in your own community, your own experience?
That is a fantastic and difficult question because it's not easy. And I do think that at times there's a tendency by some to just paint with the same paintbrush. It's communities of color, and it's like this fantastical grouping, and everyone's the same. And of course, that's not true. That's where the hard work comes in, right? A little bit behind the scenes, when I founded Voces, that was actually a compromise. What the goal was to start a program that recognized the Black community, Latinx community, tribal nations, and beyond. And it was a little bit more than we could bite off at the time. And there were some personal, individuals. So just to be frank, the easy way to do it was, well, there's the language barrier, right? And that's how Voces alone was born. But the truth is that there are cultural barriers. There are cultural barriers even between, as we see, even among white communities. White people in Appalachia are not the same as white people in California. And you dig into even argument that Black community is not monolithic, the Latinx community is not monolithic. None of our communities are monolithic. That's actually what gives us our strength as a country, right? So I think that the opportunity there and how we've dealt with it actually more effectively at Energy Foundation now is ensuring that we are looking at who may be impacted, and rather than simply assuming you're a Latinx organization, you should be at the table, making sure that that is by state, by issue, and trying to be as representative as possible. And again, I would be kidding you if I said that it's easy, because it does require significant investment of time, a willingness to bring people together to debate and come to conclusions and solutions among themselves, ideally, rather than some that is imposed upon them. But it's an ongoing struggle. So in a way, that challenge and that extra work is, I think, why we face some of that reversion to, oh, can't we just look at greenhouse gas data? It's not that as complicated as human beings are.
Okay, I'm going to look for another question, and as I'm scanning the room, I wanted to return to the data point. So in my space, which is business and social responsibility and corporate compliance, ESG has also become a political football. It's easy. E is environment, social is S, and G is governance. And people don't really want to deal with the S. And the argument is we can count greenhouse gases, we can count species loss, but what do we do to count social impacts of environment? You'd spoken about stories. I wondered if you've thought about quantitative data, qualitative data? How are you telling the stories that make sense, or how are you, to Stephen's point, inviting communities to share those stories in ways that register with someone who's an accountant or an
Thank you
engineer?
so much for that question, because you reminded me of something that I actually neglected to say, because yes, a couple of things. And you're actually, this is the next phase of my work, but one of the things so how, the question is, how do we create the data set, essentially, so that it becomes a little bit easier to at least argue that, no, here's how you count it. So technology is one of the answers. In fact, I was speaking with Isala earlier today about the use of AI and how some of my colleagues are using AI tools to capture community meetings and community input and distill this into something that then they can include either in a community benefits plan or in comments or whatever it may be needed, or even just to share with others in the community. So that's one way that technology. Another way that is actually literally my plan for 2025 is, how do we develop and elevate better models of modeling equity? How can we and this is happening already at some level at the University of Michigan, but there are, and a little bit at Northeastern. And while I was part of the Biden-Harris transition team, we did work with a few individuals who are trying to figure out how to better come up with data points and use technology to get those into a format and put them into some of those models, so that they're in economic models, so that if you're talking about ESG from a financial standpoint, the data would be there in numbers. And it's there already in some form or another as lives lost, health impacts, and dollars spent. But the more that we can make it apples to slightly different apples, the better off we are at, I think, getting some of this acceptance within these communities that really just kind of want the hard data.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Another question in the back from a student prerogative, and then faculty.
Hi, I'm Jalen Parks. I'm a 1L here at BU. Thank you for your talk. I'm wondering, I think our knee-jerk reaction oftentimes when there is an injustice is to look to the courts or the judiciary for remedies. And so I'm wondering how you and maybe Voces Verdes are harnessing insights of the law to seek those remedies outside of the law, and what successes or even failures you've seen in that work, and how you all are moving forward based off of that.
That's a great question. And yes, so obviously there are many ways that we can advocate for change. And the courts should be the last resort. This should not begin in courts. It should ideally begin in communities, and negotiating this in forums where people can speak to one another, especially those who are very similarly situated can speak to one another, because that's where the differences should first get ironed out. And then at that point, I think you have to go to your local leaders, and that's where I think you start to see the disparities begin, right? Because some communities are inevitably going to have better access, better even just more flexible time. Like it's a function of time in many cases. If I'm a single mom with 3 kids and working 2 jobs, I don't have time to go to the community meeting or to go to a lobby day, even if it's to our mayor or to our school board. But I do firmly believe that, and frankly, if you look at a lot of what's happening now at the Supreme Court, it did start in school districts. It started very small. And so that's where I think we need to begin. We need to begin at our local level. It's that quote of like all change is local, I think that's right, is that's the way that we exercise our democratic rights. And those hopefully are the ones that are going to be the last to go. We may lose the others, but if we can keep this, like if we can, I guess, just mediate rather than immediately turning to the court to solve something like this, we'll be better off.
Okay, my colleague Judge Sugarman.
Sure. I was inspired by your selection of slides to
Of
ask
course.
this question. I also thought it was interesting you tied in the Chevron question. So I want to observe that there's a tension between the fact that we've got the Roberts Court that wants maximal ahistorical presidential power, but also is against a certain kind of executive power on Chevron.
Yep.
So one explanation, and I can tie this into how you can answer this for students. One explanation is the Roberts Court believes in maximal presidential power because that's also a check against the deep state.
Yes.
And so Chevron is not, even though every time that they've invoked the major question doctrine, they don't tell you this is actually about presidential power and usually a democratic, almost always a democratic presidential initiative, but it's really about the overturning Chevron is a check against the deep state, and maximizing presidential power is to empower an elected president also against a pro-civil rights deep state, a secular deep state that's not as evangelical as the median voter, more pro-LGBT, religious pluralism. The deep state is a threat to everything the Roberts Court cares about. So, which also means that maybe our students need to hear more. I mean, I love the deep state. When I think about the deep state, another synonym for deep state is the rule of law.
Yeah.
Okay? Every time I see deep state, I play a Mad Lib. Deep
That's
state
great.
is rule of law. Maybe, but can you maybe give our students maybe a pep talk about why the deep state / the rule of law still will matter even after Project 2025?
I think we're going to have to get some T-shirts made saying "I love the deep state," and because it's true. It's the deep state is what we were talking. The deep state is where we can actually like see progress. Without the deep state, we are, to Jalen's question, we are relying on courts, and that's just not the design. I think actually if eliminating the deep state essentially eliminates one of the branches of government in some way, in that it cuts off our ability to do some of that deep thinking. It really should be the deep thinking state rather than some kind of like lurking secretive cabal. And it's the truth. So I definitely don't want to come up against, because you are by far the expert here. But I do think that it's easy to say the deep state, and you can see it. I mean, if you want to pull out the Federal Register, pull out 3, and you'll see, oh my gosh, look at all the stuff they're doing without us knowing. Well, no, it's actually, that's why it's in print. That's why, because the goal of our democracy was for us to be engaged, not for us to be checked out and delegate our power to someone else. Democracy is a participant sport, like it's an active. You got to be in there. You got to go to the hearings. You got to do. That's tough, but you do have to do that. Once you do that, you see that there is nothing mysterious about the deep state. The deep state is actually about revealing this. These are all of the pieces of things that need to happen. And we would like your input on how that should happen. And we have all these experts doing the work on how it should happen. And again, I will say the career staff are truly committed. They're not all fantastic, but they are committed to doing the right thing. And they serve as a check on the administrative state. And to your point on Project 2025, that's why it's no surprise. The goal is to get rid of a lot of those career staffers who are there to do the good work, so that it, again, can concentrate power in a singular president, not even in an executive branch, but in a president.
Can I say one?
Please.
So just to connect some dots here, you use the word cabal as a synonym for the deep state. QAnon.
That's it.
About the deep state.
Yeah.
QAnon uses the word cabal. The origin of the word cabal is a reference to rabbis and the Kabbalah, and it comes from anti-Semitism.
Anti-Semitism.
In France.
Yes.
England adopted it, but it's been lost. QAnon knows what they're referring to when they say.
And yes.
And this is the wisdom know that they're going after both Catholics and Jews.
Okay.
And as well, that culture war is the war against the deep state about blacks, Jews, Catholics, gays. And there's nothing wrong with depth, people. Deep state is depth, right?
Yes, yes, yes. I'll just say
I wa-
one thing. I hope I definitely did not mean to offend with my use of the term, but it is very, thank you for pointing out, thank you for
And I
pointing
was
out that it is
actually-
intentional. Yes.
Was going to thank you for that because I think people don't know. And
Yeah.
words, and then it becomes, a bit of another term, dog whistle, right? So what are we
Oh,
talking about when
yes.
we are using the terms that we are talking about when there are loaded in multiple meanings? But I want to continue this thought project around depth and deep thinking and the seriousness of that because we are, as lawyers, not only analysts, but wordsmiths. I saw now 2 hands, and I'm going to combine them because I did warn you that I would do that. And I had a student raise his hand first. So the rest of you will wait.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Michael. I'm a 1L. And I wanted your opinion. I'm from Louisiana, and our economy is really dependent on the oil and gas industry. And I'm from Baton Rouge, which is the capital. And there's an area called Cancer Alley where a bunch of oil refineries and plants are basically streamed along black neighborhoods. And a lot of these people obviously get cancer, hence the name. And I wanted to get your opinion on how do people grassroots organize against not only corporations of like Exxon or Shell, but also their own governor, their own state legislators who are being, financed by these corporations?
Okay. As I'm walking these others, why don't you just take that one and I'll combine the last 2?
Yeah, Michael, it's a great question, and we could do an entire few hours about Cancer Alley, and I've had the honor to work with some of the people who organized and have organized around Cancer Alley, and the hardest thing for them is organizing and staying safe. Frankly, that's another item that we're working on now: is how can we protect those who are really simply exercising their right to protest, to ask for answers. It's always peaceful, and that is, it continues to be a challenge. The best organizers I have seen have worked with, again, a number of different individuals that bring in experts like Dr. Robert Bullard, who is truly one of the fathers of environmental justice, and Beverly Wright, and others who can say, here, please protest, and here are the tools, here's what you might want to ask for when you have the mic, when you have the megaphone. There are solutions. The more that we can paint those solutions up front and say, you are intentionally choosing to ignore the solutions that are at hand and are harming my community. But a lot of it is really just making it seen. Democracy dies in darkness. That is true. It really does die in darkness. And the more that we hide, that we can keep those things out of the media because it's not cool, it's not something they want to talk about, the more we can bring them to light, that's when we bring the change.
Right, I saw 3 on this side. Some people are seating their hands, but I'm going to go first to the students and then to...
And I'll be around to chat afterwards as well.
Hi, I'm Lucha Maffei. I'm a 1L here. I had a question kind of following up from that, especially from the perspective of someone who's worked in like you said, you worked in the transition teams within the Harris administration or Biden-Harris administration. How can people who are interested in maybe working within the deep state, as you would call it, right? But especially we see with Harris on the campaign in the last few months, she's really walked back a lot of her, the Democratic establishment as a whole was really like supporting fracking in Pennsylvania, ceding a lot of concessions to big oil companies and stuff that caused the issues like Cancer Alley. How do you think people who are interested in doing some of that work can kind of have influence when it seems like the administration is, or the establishment as a whole has been really kind of stopped listening to people because they want to appease to like the median voter who's kind of uninformed on a lot of this type of stuff? So
It's a great question, and I think
Right,
that...
and that, I'm afraid, will be your
Okay.
last question because I want to respect everyone's time. I know people have got classes to go to, but if you could, yes, say everything you want to say.
Volunteer. Start by volunteering. Yeah, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, and you did offer to stay a few moments
will,
after.
yes.
Okay, so
Yes. I'd say you could start by volunteering, and but also working with nonprofit organizations that, if anti-fracking is something that you're passionate about, environmental organizations are a great place to learn, great place to be able to elevate that. And I do firmly believe that we need that push and pull. So we need the I don't know that I want to say it on both sides, but we definitely need progressive values to be pulling in that direction as well, because that's going to help us end up in a better place. And you can volunteer at all levels, or get an internship or anything like that. And I'm happy to talk about names as well, but that's the absolute best place to start to hold government accountable. Thank you so much.